So welcome everybody to 2022's Stafford Ward Memorial Lecture. We're joined today by some amazing guests that you might be able to see on your screen now with us. And we're joined in this hybrid working environment that some of us are more used to than others. Jonathan Ashworth has just arrived. I feel like we should give a round of applause. Good to see you, John.
Where do you want to squeeze in?
Where do you want us to go?
We have planned a chair for you there, John.
Yeah. Right, okay.
Is that good there? We're good? Okay, good. While John's getting himself nice and settled and relaxed, I'm going to talk a little bit about the lecture and where we're going to go with this today. So, you might see in the title that we are now called the Stafford Ward Memorial Lecture, and I just want to take a couple of moments really to talk about why we're called that. For those of you that don't know, David Stafford was a founding member of NACOA and chairman at the time of his death in 1997. He devoted the last 10 years of his life to highlighting the problems faced by children growing up in homes where there are problems with alcohol and other addictions. In his work as a psychotherapist, researcher and author, David pioneered understanding and gave hope and visibility to those who otherwise remain lost in their pain. David's widow, Sue, mum Lily, daughter Katie, brothers and sisters Tony, Peter and Barbara are hopefully joining us on Zoom today. And a little piece about Simon Ward too. Simon was appointed NACOA trustee in 1992, honourable treasurer from 1993 to 1998, and vice chair from 1998 to 2002, chair from 2002 to 2011, and he was appointed ambassador in 2011 until his death in December 2015. He provided wise counsel, the voice of reason, and his little black book of contacts. He recruited Byrne MP as our first patron 1995 to 2006, and he introduced Valerie Howarth, OBE founder, CEO of Childline, who mentored Hillary, our CEO, in the art of good governance and charity longevity on an uneven playing field. When NACOA lost the DHSC funding, she wrote to say, "I am deeply disappointed that they have ceased the funding to the helpline. What could be more in line with mental health and child protection strategies than NACOA's work?" Simon pursued Calum Best, the most famous COA in the world, and was delighted when Calum joined us in 2009, Calum, which seems a long time ago now. He recruited Nelson Consumer Research and Professor Martin Callingham, who conducted 2 search studies pro bono. The second is still the largest UK survey of children of alcoholics. And he encouraged the first political work, Early Day Motion, referring to children of alcoholics. Simon suddenly died in December 2015. He was a beacon of hope for a small charity with an enormous job to do and would have loved to have been here. In his last conversation with Hillary, Simon said it really is outstanding to attract the interest of the political heavyweight like Liam Byrne. There will be all sorts of ways in which he might help, and I wonder if he might consider setting up and chairing an all-party group to further the interests of COAs. And Simon's widow, Mandy Ward, is hopefully joining us on Zoom. And can hopefully hear us too. So, look, I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to say a couple of things before I hand over to our first speaker, which is Jonathan Ashworth today. For me, the one thing that I really do want to highlight, firstly, you can't see him on camera, but he is running about crazily in the background, and I want to just mention Piers and all the work that he does in the background for NACOA. I think it's important to highlight because Piers doesn't normally show up on camera much, or you don't often see his face, but I don't think there's anybody that works harder, arguably, than what Piers does in the background, probably putting his health on the line in some cases, and we're only probably here today and in working order because of Piers, so I want to quickly mention him. And look, everybody that's here today, the speakers that you've got here today, are going to talk about what we need to do for NACOA and what we need to do for children affected by a parent's drinking. But I do want to just highlight that NACOA has existed for over 30 years. The helpline has been there that whole time. And when we talk about what needs to be done for children of alcoholics, I think one of the most prominent things, one of the most prominent answers should be funding for a charity like NACOA. NACOA knows what it's doing, has tried and tested everything that can be done, from the things that we do on social media to the brand new website that we now have, and to being the first point of contact for the 1 in 5 children that we know are impacted by our parents drinking. I think one of the things that often goes missed, that we often feel like we want to jump to fixing and saving every single child affected by this. But what we do know from the work that we've been doing for so many years now is that many of these children affected, their parents will never reach a service. Their parents will never engage with anybody outside of their house. And the children in those houses, their chances of healing, recovery and empowerment should not be dependent on whether their parents go and seek some help. And so the anonymous helpline that children can call, completely free from judgment, is there and has lasted as long as it has because of the power in it. I think sometimes to the detriment of NACOA, we have kept the children that we are serving at the heart of what we do before anything else. And Hillary is testament to how we've grown in that way and how we've always kind of ploughed through and make sure that that stays at the centre of what we do. I'm going to shut up for a moment now, and I want to introduce our first speaker today. You've already saw him come into a bit of a hero's welcome. I'm going to read what it says on here. It says that Jonathan Ashworth made one of the most difficult speeches of his life when he spoke about his own experience in public in 2016, which he described as being entirely by accident. He was inundated by people getting in touch, despite saying he often feels guilty for speaking publicly, something that I know a lot of people will resonate with, and a feeling of betrayal to his father. Jonathan continues to raise incredible awareness, does so much work in this space. So it's my pleasure to introduce the Right Honourable Jonathan Ashworth, who is the Shadow Secretary for Work and Pensions.
Well, thank you very much. Do I need to move one of these things closer to me, or is it all right? Okay. It's okay. Well, thank you, Josh, and it's a pleasure and it's an honour to have been asked to come along and say a few words again at the annual NACOA lecture held here in the House of Commons. This is a degree of progress compared to the one last year where we were all on Zoom. At least some of us are in the room together, and let's hope by next year that we have a full room in the House of Commons again like we did, like we were used to. Because when we all get together in the room together, there is so much energy in that room, and I hope that we can capture that again. And there'll be lots of energy on the Zoom call, I am sure, but hopefully we can come together next year. I have to just have a word of apology. I can't stay for the whole of the event on this occasion because it is school half term, it is recess, I've got to get home back to Leicester for my children, and I think that's important because one of the things that I reflect on a great deal these days is that my parents, or my father rather, had a problem with alcohol, which I've talked about many times now and shared with many of you in the room and on the call, and you can probably tell the story better than I can. You've heard it so often. But one of the things I do reflect upon is whether, although I don't personally have an alcohol problem, I do times ask myself if I have an addiction to work, and whether the problems that I talk about now, about my own childhood, growing up with a father who had an addiction to alcohol, I do worry that perhaps our children will perhaps grow up and make speeches about parents who are addicted to work. So I'm going to make an effort to get home because it is half term after this speech. So I apologise to colleagues around the table who I won't get to hear you speak in person, but I will catch up with the lectures later because I'm sure we'll be able to watch it back online. I'm sure that'll be possible. So apologies, but I hope you understand. I'm delighted to be here with so many friends like you, Josh, who is an inspiration. I'm looking forward to the day when you run a London Marathon with me, raising funds for NACOA. I have, as you know, ran 3 London Marathons. I've got to make a decision about whether I enter the next one or not. Unfortunately, the date of the London Marathon has now changed. They've moved it from April to October as a consequence of the pandemic. Which means it is the weekend immediately following the Labour Party conference, and I'm not sure if the Labour Party conference is the best preparation for a London Marathon, but I've got to make a decision about whether to enter that London Marathon or not for a 4th time. But if I don't enter the London Marathon, I will certainly look at other ways of raising funds for NACOA. It's great to be here with so many other wonderful panellists like Sophie and Calum, my good mate Calum, who as you say, is probably the most famous. I always say me and Calum have a great bond. Both the sons of Bunny Girls. The team that I'm the MP for, Leicester City, has won trophies more recently than his team, of course. But but apart from that, we are great friends. We are great bonds, and it's great to be here with others like Sophie as well, who's a brilliant advocate for us, and I'm so pleased has got involved in this campaign as well. And I'm sorry I can't be here for your keynote, but I know it'll be fabulous. As you know, I used to come along to these events as the Shadow Health Secretary, and recently I moved portfolios. That's what happens in politics. But I don't want any of you to think that because I've moved from a health portfolio to a work and pensions portfolio, that has in any way dimmed my passion and commitment for this issue. As you know, I come at this from a personal place. I grew up in the shadow of alcohol abuse. I grew up not knowing how drunk my dad would be when I would get home. I grew up, because the family was divorced, in a household where often, when I went to be with my dad at weekends, particularly as my later years, teenage years, I'd be the one who'd have to go and do the shopping because the fridge was empty other than wine bottles and cans of drink. And I grew up I became an adult at a time when I'd done well in life, despite having come from a working class, poor background. I'd gone to university like no one else in my family, and I'd ended up getting a job, amazing job, which I never expected to get in my life, which was to go on to work for British Prime Minister Gordon Brown and work in Downing Street and work with brilliant ministers like Liam, who was a cabinet minister at the time. And I grew up with a situation that when I got married, my dad felt he couldn't come to my wedding because he thought he would embarrass me because of his drinking. And then 3 months later, my dad had died. And the last time I'd ever spoken to him, it was cross, it was awkward, it was difficult, because I was so upset and so devastated that he couldn't come to my wedding. The idea that he would embarrass me was complete nonsense. He was my dad, I wouldn't have cared if he'd had too much drink. People have a drink at the wedding, and that he felt that because I was surrounded by politicians in fancy suits who can use long words, or journalists, or people in Westminster, that this working class man from Salford, who drank too much, could fall over, or perhaps say something a little bit, off to somebody, he felt that would ruin the day. It wouldn't. And then, of course, 3 months later, as many people on the call will have known, because I've told the story before, he was dead. Only 60. He'd finished work by that point, he'd moved away, he was living he'd gone to Thailand and has been drinking bottles of Thai whiskey a day. And then I got the phone call at 6 a.m, thinking it was him, again drunk, because it was a Thai number. I thought, oh God, here we go again. And actually it was somebody ringing me to tell me he was dead. Those experiences have impacted me in ways which are immeasurable, and which I think about every day, and I think probably drive me in many ways in politics. It's interesting when you talk to a lot of politicians, even if they're not prepared to come to events and talk about it, there's usually some tragedy, some difficulty in their background. So perhaps that says something about the psychology of politicians, I don't know. I'll leave people on the call to come to their own judgments. And it particularly drove me when I took the health brief for the Labour Party, and I became determined that I wanted to put in place measures, services, facilities to help those who have an addiction, and to help the families of addiction, families of those someone suffering addiction. Which is why I have nothing but absolute admiration for the way in which Liam Byrne brought us together, led us, lobbied for us, made the arguments for us, did the research for us, and indeed we did convince the government to put aside some money to support children of alcoholics in the phone line of NACOA. And I know Liam is leading again, backed up in the press by Calum and others, but Liam is leading again, doing the lobbying here in Westminster. I suspect Liam will want to talk more about that. But I did dedicate myself, when I was the Shadow Health Secretary, to being determined to do something about addiction in society. Because when I look at my dad, he was a working class man from Salford who went to work in a casino. He failed his 11 plus because it was that old system in them days. He was a a huge admirer of that amazing Irish footballer George Best, and actually modelled his looks on George Best with the beard and everything. So he loved his football, but he was a clever man. That's why he got a job in the casinos when casinos were legalised in the 70s. That's why he got a job in the Playboy casino and met my mum, who was the bunny girl. And the reason he got this job and did so well at work is that he could add up quickly. He could add up the odds. This is the day. I mean, I don't go to casinos, but I presume now they have sort of calculators and computers who do this. But in them days, the odds on roulette tables and card games and so on, the croupiers had to add it up in their heads. So he was a clever man. He was good at maths, far better than maths than I am today. And I think it tells you something about addiction, which is how much talent is wasted, how many opportunities are stifled, how many people who could have gone on to achieve so many extraordinary great things are stopped in their tracks because of an addiction. I used to say to him, why don't you go on, do more? In them days, people who, and I suppose it's still the case, I imagine, but in them days, people who worked in casinos were much sought after to go and work on cruise ships. And I used to say to him, you could travel the world. You could be going around the Caribbean on cruise ships, being a croupier. You could probably make lots of money out of it, I don't know, but it'd certainly be sunshine and more glamorous lifestyle than living in North Manchester and getting the bus to Salford every night and walking back from Salford. But he never wanted to do that, and I think it was because he thought his alcohol addiction would hold him back and he wouldn't survive on those cruise ships. And the reason I'm telling this story is that because I am in this new role now, which is work and pensions, which is where my policy responsibility as a Labour spokesperson moves not from health and the addiction services, but moves to employment services and how we get people into work. And when you just look at the statistics, areas of high unemployment, or areas where there is high alcohol abuse, there is a correlation between alcohol deaths and areas of high unemployment and deprivation. We know there are lots of people who could contribute so much to our society, who could contribute so much if they were just given a chance and given the support to beat their alcohol addiction, to deal with their drink problems, but yet they're not given any support. They're not given a chance. They're not given that opportunity, and that's why I want to come along today to NACOA and to reassure you all that even though I've moved from health, I'm now doing work and pensions, to reassure you that my commitment is not dimmed and that I'm still passionate about helping people who have alcohol addiction. And when I was in the health job, I used to go around from time to time to visit services that work with people. And I met people, and you talk to people. People were clever. People can produce the most beautiful art on the walls of addiction services. They can laugh, they can joke, their conversation can be exquisite observations about life. So don't tell me people don't have talents. Don't tell me people cannot contribute to our society. Don't tell me that people should be written off and forgotten about or degraded. Of course people can be given an opportunity if they're given a chance by the system. And that's what I'm absolutely committed to doing. And it's why we also need organisations like NACOA and the other organisations who work in the field, like ADFAT and the Children's Society and all the different organisations who follow NACOA's lead. Because unless we help people, we know it impacts on the generations and go down to the generations. We know that a child who grows up in the shadow of alcohol often can go on to develop similar problems themselves. So I wanted to come along here today to express my support to you, to recommit myself to you, to say I may well do a marathon if Josh and Calum join me, or Sophie joins me. But say to you, we are about giving people a chance, giving people the chances that so many of us take for granted, and we have to be determined to do it. And equally, I'm sorry I have to leave you, because if I feel strongly that children's childhood is taken away from them by alcohol, then I can't be a hypocrite. I can't let my children's childhood be taken away by my commitment to work. But thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here as always.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you. Look, firstly, I worry that if me and Calum joined you on a marathon,
We hold you back.
there wouldn't be a good set of knees in sight, I don't think. No, but look, on a serious note, the one thing I just want to say is that, and I've said this before countless times, but you running a marathon with an NACOA t-shirt on, I remember as a child seeing people raising awareness and money for charities running marathons, and I remember I used to sit and think, I'll never be able to do that for my dad. And what would it say on my dad's t-shirt? Like, support alcoholics. I couldn't see it in a million years. So to see you running it twice now?
3 times.
3 times. And a fourth time in October on your own is incredible. So thank you. We know that you may have to leave us at some point, but we appreciate you coming. I'm going to bring us on to our next speaker now, and our next speaker has been a patron since 2009. I'm going to read what it says here in front of me. It says, TV personality and entrepreneur, Calum became a patron after filming the BBC documentary Brought Up by Booze. Over the past 12 years, he's been an amazing ambassador, reaching out on TV shows, news coverage, etc., and supporting NACOA's social media output. He's regularly named as the person who showed the callers the way to NACOA. Look, we talked earlier about him being the most famous COA. I think his Instagram account says that, right, with 1 million people on there. But I do, what Calum has done for not just NACOA, but the children affected by parents drinking, I do believe is immeasurable. So,
Thanks, mate.
Let me hand over to you, mate.
Hi, everyone. First of all, it's an honor to be invited back again. I think this is my 3rd time here. I'm speaking on behalf of NACOA and with an incredible panel as well. I've been really lucky, and if I'm honest with you, no matter what it came from, it's a blessing to be a patron to NACOA. The experiences that I've had over the past 12 years are some of the best experiences of my life. It's been an honor to climb some of the highest mountains in the world, to run marathons, to put on football games, to use my social media platform as a place to try to guide people the best I can to finding answers and finding support through NACOA. And the craziest part is that when I found out I was coming back for this 3rd time to speak, I thought, I've been doing this for 12 years. I've been openly talking about what I've been through on so many different levels for the past 12 years. So I thought, what can I do that's brand new? What can I say that's brand new? Do I talk the real, raw, nitty-gritty of what I've been through? And then I actually thought, wow, maybe I'll say this. No, I can't say that. Maybe I'll tell this story. Actually, I'm definitely not telling that story. Oh, that story could be good. Whoa, people might not understand that one. I might be judged. It's really, really intense, that one. And the point of me telling you that story is it made me think, if after 12 years of me, what I think is comfortably speaking about this, I still am hesitant and nervous and cautious and worried because of a stigma and a lack of understanding to openly speak about what I've been through, imagine what the other 2.6 million kids that haven't even started the process feel. Yeah? The people that haven't even taken the first step to understanding where they're at, understanding what they're going through, healing, grieving, coping, it just made me think there is so much more work that needs to be done. That's why we're all here to support NACOA and what NACOA does, and with your support, of course, as well, because there's still a stigma, there's still so much more that needs to be done in order to show a guiding light to the children. And for me, that's what this is all about. It's about letting the kids know that there is a path, there is a way, there is a platform, there are people. Mine's quite short and sweet today because after rambling on for 12 years, I really like to hear other people's stories as well. But I just want to say one more thing. There's been a culture I've seen created, especially really recently, about no one cares, go for it yourself, do it by yourself, right? I see these memes created on social media, and I use my social media a lot, try to use it the best I can. And I always see, no one cares, no one's coming, get on with it. And I think that's the wrong message. And my message to you out there, and hopefully you can pass on to the other people, is we care, right? I care. Everybody on this panel cares. I believe you all care. But now we've got to reach out to the government and make them care. It's about tapping in to the people that can actually, besides us, make a difference financially. Because we can keep yelling this from the rooftops, and we will. But the wider audiences, the real support, the branching out the best we can will come from funding, and the funding will come from the government. So I sometimes wonder why it got cancelled. Why did it go? Why did it disappear? And I remember when I came here last year and I spoke, and I saw on my social media the responses we got for asking the government to fund NACOA and kids of alcoholics and whatever entailed with it, was people didn't think it was a priority. And I won't get too deep into this, but I think it's because this is a drinking culture we live in, right? People don't quite understand that we're not trying, actually, all due respect, we are trying to help the drinker as well and understand the alcoholic themselves. But this is about helping the children who don't even have a choice in what their parents do or did. So my goal is to just let the kids and the young adults out there, they're not alone. We'll continue it, but everybody here has to do their part to try to get the funding from the government the best we can, because there's so much more work that needs to be done. But the good news is we're on the right path. And that's it for me.
Brilliant.
Very much found myself wanting to shout here at many occasions, based on where we are today. But listen, totally appreciate everything that you do, Calum. And we're saying goodbye to Jonathan now.
I'm sorry, I'm going to go.
No, that's all right. That's all right. Have fun with the kids.
Meet you in person.
See you next time, mate. Thank you.
Yeah,
man.
I speak on behalf of everyone, Calum, when, for you to speak as passionately as you always do, right? And I know what risk comes with speaking out for anybody. So for you to come and do what you do, we massively will always appreciate it. So we're going to come now to Arabella Byrne, a NACOA supporter. And it says here, prolific journalist and writer Arabella recently wrote an article in the Mail with her novelist mother, Julia Hamilton, about their shared journeys of recovery. We did an amazing live as well a while back, which people should definitely go and check out. So without further ado, let me hand it over to you, Arabella.
Thank you so much, Josh, and it's like a really amazing experience to be sitting here and talking about being a COA, which is something in my life that I haven't talked about enough, and I feel like there's so much more to do. And it's also really special and bittersweet for me to be sitting looking at St Margaret's, Westminster, which is where my sister got married over 10 years ago, and that was one of the last times I saw my dad, and he died 6 months after he walked my sister down the aisle. And my parents hadn't spoken for 26 years when they met at my sister's wedding. And I feel like children of alcoholics will understand that feeling of, is this going to be okay? Is my mum going to be able to speak to my dad? I've never seen this. I don't, to understand that these feelings of anxiety, and these are things that lots of people simply don't have to think about. But my dad wasn't well at the wedding, and he certainly didn't look well, and he did all the things that, alcoholics do. He fell over, he was painfully thin, he kept popping out for cigarette breaks and falling over and all that sort of stuff. But it just reminds me, looking at that church, it reminds me of what there is to do, really. But what I want to talk about today is just a little piece that I wrote about stories and how we tell this story and how we, So year after year, we know that children call the NACOA helpline to be read a bedtime story, and NACOA CEO Hilary Henriquez describes this as a moment of reflection for children as they recover from what she calls the great revelation of their domestic and emotional circumstances. And narrative, that bridge between the conscious and unconscious worlds for so many children, is needed here, not to smooth the passage into sleep, as it does for my little girl when I read her bedtime stories, but to distract from the waking discomfort that the lost children of alcoholism face on a daily basis. And NACOA patron Camilla Tominey mines the importance and potential of the bedtime story for children of alcoholics in her amazing Radio 4 documentary, The Monster Downstairs, in which audio clips of her reading to her own children are poignantly set against her story as the child of an alcoholic mother. And I know that documentary was really powerful and important to me. As the child of 2 alcoholic parents, I count myself fortunate to have been read bedtime stories at all. But my mother was a novelist, and she prized the written word, and she would often read me long passages of Narnia or the famous Five, no matter what else was going on in our household. And often, I would smell the alcohol on her breath, she'd be smoking, it was not the ideal situation. But alongside these narratives ran a different and much darker story that I struggled to make out. And this is the story that we all know. It's the story of parental alcoholism. It's a story without explicit words or pictures. It's a story snatched from the hoarse and whispered adult voices behind closed doors. It's a story in which there are neither heroes nor villains, and it has no beginning, middle, or end. Sadly, as we all know around this table today, it's a story that's very rarely told. A story locked in silence, lest the storytellers are accused of betrayal, of washing their dirty laundry in public, of breaking the code of a murder that children of alcoholics are so often subjected to. But for the sake of argument, let's try and attach an arc to it. Where did it begin? Was it with the first glass, shakily carried from room to room from mid-morning on? Or did it start long before then, in the shadowy era of my parents' childhood? I can't tell you, because they never spoke about the past and the photos tell me nothing. Rows of faces at school, weddings, a photo of my father as a child swinging his legs against a wall. It seems hard to believe that it could have started there. For a long time, I thought that this story of parental alcoholism began with me. I blamed myself for their irritation and listlessness as they paced around the house looking for bottle openers and ashtrays. I tried to play quietly under the table in the pub or to look away when one or both of my parents stumbled up the stairs. But I still felt that I was responsible. I still felt that I was at the story's dark heart. Stories require action and development as they move from one phase to another, except in this story there isn't really a middle. Things didn't so much develop as disintegrate. Bottles smashed on the floor, raised voices, and the sharp smell of cigarette smoke as it curled up the stairs. A sure sign that things would escalate into violence soon after. Was there an ending? I'm still trying to work that one out. Did it end when my father died of an alcohol-induced heart attack 9 years ago? Or did it end when my mother and later I walked into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous 9 months apart, 12 years ago this month? It's taken me a long time to accept the fact that the ending to this story is in my hands, and it's through charities like NACOA that I'm able to do this. I realise with people, when I watch people like Liam and I watch people like John and Calum and all of you speak, I realise that I am capable of telling the story of my own life. Research shows that having an alcoholic parent can have a long-lasting and devastating impact on a child, and we know this. Children of alcoholics are twice as likely to have problems at school, 3 times as likely to consider suicide, and 5 times more likely to develop an eating disorder. They are also 4 times more likely to become alcoholics themselves, and this is a fact that I can attest to with my own experience. More than a third of all child case reviews involve a history of abuse of alcohol. And telling the central story of these facts is hard because the term child of an alcoholic hasn't entered into the national consciousness in the way that it deserves. And I believe this is because the narrative of alcoholism is all too often told in isolation. Its supporting cast cut out of the central scenes as the protagonist makes their journey towards recovery or tragically death. But what about the other people? What about the other players in the story? The child who begs their parent to stop drinking so that their friends can come to play. The daughter who clears away the wreckage of alcoholism in her own house for fear that her parent might be found out or cautioned. Or the son who refuses to get in a car with his father after he has been drinking. And like an incomplete manuscript, the work is simply unfinished without these voices. I really believe it's time we add them to the story. Time for children of alcoholics to narrate what happened in their own right. And the story of NACOA too is incomplete. And we need to work hard to ensure that it has the tools to become a finished product and to become the full story that it deserves to be. And an organisation that with the right funding is able to provide help and access to long-term solutions for the forgotten victims of alcoholism. I'm just going to end with a quote from one of my favourite writers, which is about stories. And I thought about it a lot when I was writing this, but one of my favourite American writers, Rebecca Solnit, writes about stories, and she says, "Stories are compasses and architecture, and we navigate by them. We build our sanctuaries and our prisons out of stories. And to be without a story is to be lost in the vastness of a world that spreads in all directions. Like Arctic tundra or sea ice. To love someone is to put yourself in their place, we say, which is to put yourself in their story." For a long time, I know that I navigated my life with the story of my parents' addiction, and I put myself in their story, and I excused a lot of my own behaviours because of my parents. But their story became suffocating and airless for me because I was unable to construct my own from its narrative beams. In the last 10 years, I see that I am able to weld the two together. My heart breaks for every child of an alcoholic who calls the helpline to be read a bedtime story, and I say this as a mother of a 4-year-old child. It absolutely breaks my heart to imagine my daughter calling a helpline to be read a bedtime story, but it happens. But at the same time, my heart soars because I know from my own experience that stories can set us free. I know that they anchor us within the world and become so much more than simply stories. They are the intentions of our future, and they are a path to change. Thank you.
Arabella, thank you. Such poignant words. There's so much that I could reflect on what you said there. Particularly, what really comes through for me in everything that you've just said is just how much we need a lifetime of healing as the children, right? I am somebody who went on to have my own difficult relationship with alcohol. I know from experience the hardest thing for me to get over is what I experienced when I was a child. That's the lasting thing that I still have to work through. I do this stuff every day of my life, and on any given day I still wake up as the young boy that I was, wondering why my dad drank instead of playing with me. And I say that with emotion in my body because there's emotion in my body when I say it, and that will never go away. And so I'm very thankful for people like yourself that come forward and speak so powerfully in the way that you did.
Yeah, that's a great story.
Yeah, I think you can feel the emotion in the room. You can feel the emotion in the room. And you talked a lot about stories, you talked about your favourite author, you talked about the power in stories. And that wasn't purposely done, but I think it leads very nicely into Jane Elson. NACOA trustee, 2021 to date. Jane's story of Lockdown Now, I'm going to read these words here in a moment, I'm going to say my own first. Jane's stories of Lockdown Now, I think got a lot of children and adult children through the lockdown. It was one of the powerful things to come out of the experience that we all had with lockdown. Jane is a multi-award-winning children's author. She writes about the children. She writes about those children that are not often written about, including Lockdown Now, a storybook for young children which was created in 10 days with the online education introduced by patron Geraldine James. The online edition introduced by patron Geraldine James, and follows now from Will You Catch Me during the pandemic. It's a great pleasure to hand over to you, Jane.
Thank you. I'm going to stand up. Is that okay? Can you hear me?
Now,
Yes.
loud and nice and loud, and they'll be.
Can you hear me? People
Yeah.
on Zoom? Yes, hurrah. Hello. Thank you. I'd like to share with you all what's written on my necklace, which is unafraid, powerful, clarity, vision. For me, these are words that describe NACOA. Let's start with unafraid. I wasn't unafraid. I was always afraid. I still remember the sound of the key in the lock and the fear I felt as a child. And in my belly would hurt, wondering what mood my dad would be in. I wish with all my heart that I had known then that I was on a path that would lead me to NACOA, the charity for children and parents who drink too much. I wish with every bone in my body that this dyslexic child labelled stupid at school and told she would never achieve anything had known that she was on a path to becoming an author and that these two paths would marry. But I felt no path beneath my feet. I felt nothing. I didn't think about my own feelings at all. As I said in my lunchtime interview with you, Josh, using a theatre analogy, if your happiness depends on how a parent is going to act that day, you do not get to be the leading lady or gentleman in your own life. You are the bit player, the one on the side. You never get to feel your own feelings. Let's go to the next red on my necklace now, which is powerful. As a child, I would grab these tiny bits of power where I could get them. Now, this old man came to my junior school and asked us all to enter a sponsored swim for Help the Aged. But the rules were you had to be able to swim 2 lengths. I had only ever swum a width, doggy paddle. But I wanted to swim for the old people, so I put my hand up in the air and my teacher said, "Put your hand down, Jane, you can't swim." But I ignored her and I climbed over all the children sitting on the floor to grab my sponsor form. When I took it home to my mum, I gave it to her and she said, "This is really dangerous, Jane, you can't swim." And when my dad came home, he thought it was the funniest thing ever and he snatched my sponsor form from my hand and went to the pub. Well, he was going up to all these people drinking and saying, "Sponsor my daughter, she can't swim, you won't have to pay a penny." And when my dad came home from the pub, worse for wear, he proudly handed me my sponsor form. It was full. But when I looked at it, my heart sank, as people hadn't written their own names. They'd written the name of famous people. So Her Majesty the Queen sponsored me. Mick Jagger sponsored me, and someone had signed themselves George Best. So your lovely dad sponsored me in that swim without even knowing it.
Amen.
I still remember Mum shouting at Dad as I cowered on the stairs and listened to the argument. "You are going to have to pay all that money from your own pocket because nobody has written their own names." My dad's reply was, "I won't have to pay a penny, she can't swim." Come the day of the Help the Aged sponsored swim, and I lined up at the edge of the pool with all the other children. When the whistle was blown, they all dived in. I jumped in, holding my nose, and I doggy paddled. And I paddled, and I paddled, and I paddled, and I reached the end of the pool. I looked up at the gallery where Mum and Dad were sitting. Mum looked proud, Dad looked shocked. I pushed off from the side and started to doggy paddle my second length, and I did it. I reached the end. My dad shouted from the gallery, "Well done, get out now. I'll meet you by the vending machines." I gave him a cheeky little wave, and I pushed off for my third length. Well, I started to show off now. I did a bit of front crawl, flailing my arms through the water. I even dabbled in some backstroke. I looked up at the gallery, and my dad's face had gone very pale. As I swam up and down, I could hear my dad shouting, "Get out of the pool now!" But I just gave him a little wave and carried on. When this little red-eyed girl could swim no more, the lifeguard lifted me from the pool and my legs buckled beneath me. I had swum 10 lengths. In the car on the way home, my mum said to my dad, "It serves you right. Now you're going to have to pay hundreds of pounds out of your own pocket because all those drunk people wrote the name of famous people and not their own." But it was a sweet moment. As though my dad's pockets were empty, I could see he was full of pride for me. That story became my book, Swimming to the Moon. So now, let's go to the next 2 words on my necklace, clarity and vision. Fast forward to when I was 19, I worked as an actor, but in between jobs I was an usherette in a theatre in Covent Garden, a place synonymous with the most famous usherette turned actress of all times, Nell Gwynn. who 359 years ago worked as an orange girl and then rose to become the most famous comic actress in England. Nell Gwyn was a Coa. And at only 13 years old, when she finished selling her oranges for the day, she would traipse up Drury Lane to Coalyard Alley, where her drunken mum ran a brothel. It really doesn't bear thinking what her childhood was like. I would come up to Covent Garden really early for work every day and traipse the streets because I didn't want to be at home. One particular day, I was walking up Charing Cross and I saw this old book, The Story of Nell Gwyn, and it was in the window. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I had to buy that book. Now it was £20. It's a lot of money back then on my usherette's wage, but buy it I did. It sat untouched for many years on my bookshelf. Fast forward to 2016, I was eating my breakfast and watching the Lorraine show. Calum, you came on as a guest. And you talked about your dad and Nakoa with such dignity, and you moved me. And I knew with instant clarity and vision, I had to write a children's book about a girl called Nell Hobbs, who lived on the Beckham estate with her alcohol-dependent mum, and whose guardian angel was Nell Gwyn. I abandoned my breakfast and I took up this book and I started delving into the world of Nell Gwyn. And as the story started to grow in my mind, I started to write, Will You Catch Me? It wasn't an easy journey. My eyesight started to fail. I hadn't realised I was developing cataracts, but as I wrote, I kept myself going by visualising a long silver tunnel, and at the end of it was Nakoa, you, Calum, and Hilary. And when I finally reached the end of the tunnel and wrote the words, the end, I phoned Nakoa to ask permission to have their helpline number in the back of my book so that children who needed to could reach out. I spoke to Amanda, and that phone call changed my life as I was welcomed into the Nakoa family with open arms. Fast forward to the pandemic, I received an email from Hilary asking the question, how would Nell cope in lockdown? So I'm going to read you that email. The feeling of being trapped, isolated, ignored and abandoned are very real, and I wonder if there is any way we could embody that experience with Nell. And Hilary had attached a report called The Lost Children, which spoke of children trapped in the pandemic with their drunk parents, some without food, as their parents stockpiled alcohol. I wept. But then I had a word with myself and said, stop crying and do something. And I started to write Lockdown Nell, a short story to encourage Coas trapped in the pandemic to phone the helpline. My editor, Naomi Greenwood, and my designer, Michelle Brackenborough, devoted their time to making the ebook of Lockdown Nell as good as it could be. With Hilary at the helm and Piers doing your usual magic on the graphics, we decided to make an audio version. I played Nell and I was thrilled when Geraldine James gave Lockdown Nell such a beautiful introduction. We, Band of Six, turned the whole resource round in just 10 days. Hilary calls Nell Nakoa's angel. I call her my word child. And as she marched out of the pages of Will You Catch Me and into Lockdown Nell, she started her march across the globe. As alcohol agencies around the world reached out to Nakoa to ask if they could use Lockdown Nell as a resource, including the Hazelden Betty Ford Children's Programme. And Nell then marched into Parliament, where I was told, Liam, that you listened to Lockdown Nell and appreciated her. Speaking here today is the biggest honour of my life. I'd like to read you now an extract from Lockdown Nell. Sorry.
It's okay.
I can't breathe.
No. Yeah, well done. Well done.
Okay. Nell is proud to be the only naturalist on the Beckham estate. She has a tortoise called Bob Marley, goldfish Beyonce and Destiny, and guinea pigs Aspo and Chaos. My tummy gurgles. I open all the kitchen cupboards again, just in case I missed some food. I didn't. They are empty. Then I spy a single pink, hundreds and thousands sprinkle in the corner. It must have come off a bun. I lick my finger so it sticks to it and place it on the tip of my tongue, loving the sugary taste. Mum spent all our food money on drink, every last penny. We will have a lockdown party for two, she said. Lockdown will be fun, my Nelly now. Mum put on that Beyonce song about being crazy and in love. Only it was crazy, truly crazy, and the party went on and on and on for days, but it wasn't a party for two, it was a party for one, because I wasn't invited into her drink world. I am proud to be the only naturalist on the Beckham estate. I want to be free, running over the wasteland by our estate, feeling the wind on my face, not trapped in my flat prison with my dancing drunk mum. I pull the kitchen blind down just in case the postman or anyone looks through the window and sees my mum slumped over the table. I then go to the bedroom and I get her favourite pink jumper and I drape it round her shoulders just in case she gets cold. I love you, Mum, I whisper in her ear, and I try and link my little finger with her sleeping little finger, which is the special thing we do when she makes her pinky promise, before she goes and breaks it over and over and over. There's a knock on the door. I run and open it, and there's a bag at my foot with a note, "For your animal family from Mr. and Mrs. Patel, kiss." I see Mrs. Patel hurrying away, a mask over her face. "Thank you, Mrs. Patel," I call after her. "Thank you for your kindness." And a tear escapes and I can't stop it. I wipe the outside of the package, open it up and wash my hands. There is some lettuce and some carrots, and before I can stop it, I have stuffed a handful of lettuce leaves into my mouth, and I am filled with hate for what I have just done. What kind of naturalist am I to eat my animal family's food? I look down at my drunk mum. I can't take it anymore. And I run to my bedroom, swallowing and choking on the lettuce leaves. And I dial Nakoa. "Hello? I am Nell," I say. "Please, can you help me," I say, as the listening lady tells me, "You are not alone." And I tell her that I am guilty of eating Bob Marley's lettuce. I start to feel safe and like I am swimming in her kindness. Thank you. I'd like to finish my talk today with leaving you with the 4 words on my necklace: unafraid, powerful, clarity, vision. Words we all need to grab onto as we take Nakoa into the future. Thank you.
I sort of got to regain my composure a little bit after that, Jane. Thank you. You know what? I kind of think that whoever allowed this funding to stop, I get the sense they've picked on the wrong group of people. And I can't imagine any other set of circumstances where a group of people like the group in this room would come together and speak in this way. And that's something that I'm thankful for. And look, the passion in each individual way that's been in this room already today is incredible. And I hold a huge amount of gratitude for that. I have to move on, and I'm going to move on to the man that has been my partner in crime now for 6 years. 6 years ago, I sat on the BBC breakfast sofa with Liam Byrne 6 years ago to launch this manifesto. Liam's an incredible man, having known him now for the 6 years that I have, and we sort of Liam found Nakoa shortly after, or not too long after I had found Nakoa myself, and I think we've kind of been on a similar journey in terms of self-discovery as a result of what Nakoa has taught us. The Right Honourable Liam Byrne MP, following the death of his father, Liam walked into the Nakoa office in 2015, asking to help, and in 5 short months shone the light on this secretive problem by establishing the APPG, of Children of Alcoholics, which was established in 2016, and publishing the first ever worldwide manifesto for change in 2017. It is my great pleasure to hand over live from wherever you are that isn't here, Liam, to Liam Byrne. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I'm so sorry that I can't be there in person. I tested positive for COVID last Wednesday, and so I'm still in isolation, and in isolation without parties. We don't. We're properly isolated here. So I'm here, just kind of shedding tears, listening to the incredible stories and the incredible power of the speakers that we've brought together again. And so, to Hilary, to Piers, to everyone on the COA team, just a heartfelt thank you for everything you do every day and for this special moment every year. So I've just got a couple of things to throw in, really. I think one of the things that really strikes me listening to everybody today is the power of stories to break the sound barrier. And, we have come together in this way because we need each other. I wouldn't be here without NACOA. But also there's great work that we can do by coming together. But that means getting our message across, reaching the children who think they're on their own, who think it's their fault, who are suffering in silence. And that's why the stories that each of us tell, they're so important, because stories break the sound barrier. That's how we reach the people that we need to reach. Now, obviously, I'm a politician. I believe in the power of politics to change the world for the better. There's still a couple of us left who believe that, fools that we are. And so the two things really that I wanted to just throw in today are the results from our annual Freedom of Information exercise. So one of the things that I knew that we needed when I got involved is we need data. That data is how you win arguments. And I want to say a huge thanks both to Kate Evans and to James Laverick on my team, who have worked so hard to help with the event today, and James in particular, who's put together this nationwide FOI exercise. And it's not great news, so I'm not going to pull my punches, because the context is that the latest data shows nearly a million A&E admissions due to some kind of alcohol-related cause. That's where we are now. That's hugely up on previous numbers. But, alongside that, there's been a 19% rise in alcohol-related deaths. That is one of the largest increases anywhere in the world. So, we've got a lot of survey data about how the pressure of lockdown for a lot of families did lead to people drinking more, but just the impact on people dying is just incredible. And the point we make at NACOA is obviously many of those families that are at the sharp end of that pain, they're homes to children. They are homes to children. And the children aren't in the statistics, but the children are hurt by what you see written in those statistics. So we also revealed today that 57% of councils still don't have a strategy for children of alcoholics. About 2/3 of councils have either cut or held steady their budgets for addiction treatment, and 44% of councils have actually referred fewer people to addiction services than in the previous year. So the problem is getting bigger, and the support is getting smaller. So we have had a couple of health secretaries since we kind of last really got together. And we've had a couple of health secretaries since Jeremy Hunt put £6 million into pilots, and we had funding for the helpline switched off in the middle of the pandemic. And so it actually took us to last week before the All Party Group took a delegation to see the new health secretary, Sajid Javid, to give him first sight of that data. And there was some good news that came out of that meeting. So Sajid has undertaken to look again at the funding for the NACOA helpline. understands very clearly that that money best comes from national government, not from local government. Second, he has promised us the results of the pilots that were funded by about £6 million in the spring. Now, spring is politician code for somewhere between kind of March and June. But basically, between March and June, we will get the results from these pilots. And that gives us a really important moment where we can bring people from all over the country to the House of Commons to say, okay, what did you learn? What's worked? Tell us what good practice looks like in supporting children of alcoholics. And the evidence that has come in already shows what's, quote, remarkable results. So, as we know, there is good practice out there, and it works. We just need to make sure that good practice somewhere is best practice everywhere. So I'm hoping that by summertime, either July, possibly September, October, we'll be able to bring those insights to the House of Commons so that we can all see what's what and what's been learned and what needs to go nationwide. And then, you know, the root of all progress in politics is money, as Calum said, and the government is making available a new budget for addictions, 177 million a year, that comes online in April, from this April, and that will be 177 million a year for 3 years. And what the Health Secretary promised us in the meeting is that he will allow that money to be spent on services for children of alcoholics. So that gives us potentially quite a big budget to tap into, as long as we make sure every council's got the strategy in place, as long as we make sure that every council's learning from the best practice. So, you know, it's been a difficult year or two for us, but I can now see rays of light and rays of hope. So the community of children of alcoholics in Parliament gets bigger and bigger. You know, every year we circulate news of this. I have more MPs get in touch to say, yeah, me too, I've not talked about it. I have conversations with people in the corridors around where the guys are sitting there at the Commons, and, you know, they, I say to them, look, you know, sometime think about telling your story in public. And sometimes they will say to me, well, you now know more about it than anyone else in the world. So, you know, for everybody who's the child of an alcoholic, you wrestle with whether you can tell your story, because it's not, you're not the author of it, you're a character in it, but you're not necessarily the author of that story. But it just kind of underlines the point I started with, really, that stories are so important. They're important for us because they help with healing, but they're also important for others because they help us get our message across. But ultimately, we've got to back those stories with services. Services that can help make sure that children growing up today in the kind of families that we grew up with don't have to go through a lot of the experiences that we had to go through. So, Josh, massive thanks for hosting today. I'm so sorry I can't be there with you. Fingers crossed I'll be out of isolation a bit later on this week. But all strength to you. Thanks, everyone.
Liam, can I ask quickly, Liam, that sounds to me like some of the most promising news I've ever heard in my years of NACOA, of a budget like that is potentially going to be able to be tapped into. Is that right? How do you feel about it?
I'm going to believe it when I see it.
Okay. So that's fair. It sounded good, so let's just hope, yeah?
So it sounds potentially really significant.
Yeah.
And on the Twitter thread, I've shared the letter that we put to Sajid Javid, like the minute we came out of the meeting, said, right, we need to write to him to kind of put that in black and white until I get the letter in confirmation back on those points. That's when I'll get a bit more excited. So I'm cautiously optimistic. Let's hope for the best.
Cool. Yeah. And as has been sort of a bit of a common thread throughout the whole meeting so far, the stories, our stories, are so important, right? And I think as long as we keep fighting and keeping this in the public consciousness in the way that we have, I think that's what puts pressure, right, to make sure that does come through. And so, you know, from sharing a tweet to sharing something on your social media to sharing a poster of Nakoa, anything like that, right, for the people that are watching or anybody that's hearing this, can be vital, right, to keep it in the public conscious. Cool. Liam, are you sticking around for the questions at the end?
Yeah, no,
You've got nowhere to go, so... Thank you. And just a reminder for the questions in the chat function, at any point we are going to come to them after our final keynote speaker, who I'm going to come to now. I first saw Sophie on Twitter, I believe. I noticed that you were sort of liking some of our tweets and sharing some of our tweets, and I have these big moments of whenever somebody in the public eye, dare I say famous, I don't know whether you go with that word, but whenever I see that, I do have this big moment of they're one of us, right? They're one of us. Maybe they'll see us. Maybe they'll see us. And we then went on to do probably one of the most infamous, one of the most famous Nakoa lives ever. I think people were just sort of blown away by you and the way that you talked about your own experiences, despite your terrible Wi-Fi at the time. Which did actually mean that we were able to revisit and have a good excuse to do it again. And the second one was just as good, if not better, and people should go and watch it if they haven't yet seen it. Sophie K is a radio and television presenter and a respected presenter in the world of rock. She presents for Kerrang! Radio, Absolute Radio, and Amazon Music, to name but a few. And so it gives me a great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for today, Sophie K.
Thank you, and thank you to everybody who's spoken so far and everyone that's here, because it's always beautiful hearing people's stories. I messaged Hilary and I was like, hi, what do I speak about? And she was like, just do, turn up, just speak, do you. And I thought, right, okay, so I scribbled down notes. I haven't really planned too much, so I thought I'd just tell you the story of how somebody with orange hair and wearing Doc Martens ended up in the House of Commons. What am I doing here? This is hilarious. Anyway, my name's Sophie K, and I'm a presenter for Kerrang! Absolute. I'm the voice of Hits Radio, as Josh said, and a lot of the time people ask me how I managed to do this, because have a look around at commercial radio. There's not enough women who present shows on their own. There's certainly very few women of black heritage, so black and mixed women. And so people always go, oh, it's amazing, how did you manage to do it? And I always feel really uncomfortable at that question, because I'm like, I'm not special, I'm not amazing, it wasn't a skill. Because what I've learned over my years is that when I was a kid, the only way to get noticed by my mum, who was the alcoholic, was to be visible. So if I performed, if I did impressions of her, if I was like la 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 la, made all her friends laugh, then it meant that I was in her good books and I got attention. And it meant that I felt some sense of love from her. I had to be the best at everything. I remember going home once and going, I got number 3 in the whole class on my score. And my mum went, uh-huh, and who got number 1? And what was their score? And it just took away all the joy that I had. And the other thing I had to learn to do is I never knew what mood she was going to come home in. Or what mood she'd wake up in. So I've learned to read people. So it means I can sit and interview someone, and there can be a flicker, hair movement. Well, I should have been in the FBI. Not an American. But there'll be a flicker in their face of emotion, and I can sense it instantly. And so I know where to steer the interview. And people say, oh, how do you do it? How do you get so good at interviews? And I can't go, well, because my mum was a raging alcoholic, and so I had to kind of learn how to read people, because otherwise I'd get in trouble. And so I just kind of go, oh, you don't play it down. But because I'm in good company here, let's be honest. And I think the only way to do that is to go back, to tell you my story. So I grew up in South London to 2 of the coolest parents you can probably imagine. My mum was a model, which made people think that we must have been really rich and had a fancy life, but she was a black model. So people didn't get paid as much, do you know what I mean? Let's put it, this is in the kind of 80s time, so you know how it was. And my dad was this like kind of cool hippie dude who rebuilt cars, and there was always a joke about how I was nearly born in a toilet because my mum was drunk and she was at a Vivienne Westwood show, so I was 28 weeks premature. Now, I can't tell you much about my childhood because it's as if someone pressed highlight all, delete, and just got rid of the whole lot. Because I suffer from something that's called complex PTSD, but I'll explain all that another time. I know what I do remember is that I learned a lot of lessons when I was younger. Things like not knowing what mood my mum was in. Things like being terrified of her. One of my earliest memories is I wet the bed till quite late. And I remember I used to have to always sneak into my parents' room and, Daddy, and I had to not wake up my mum, because if I woke her up, there'd be a rage. You should not be wetting the bed! Look at how old you are! So, that's one of my earliest memories. I spent my teen years living in Uganda. That's when my mum's drinking became even worse, and it also didn't help that I was getting older. I was shielded from the worst of it when I was younger, but as I got older, it started to direct towards me. My mum was always surrounded by these drinking buddies and these friends, and if any of them ever spoke up to try and protect me, they were gone, and I'd just never see them again. My dad, because I know a lot of people go, where was your dad? He was just the ultimate optimist, and he was always saying things like, it's all right, she doesn't mean it, it's going to get better, we're going to get through this, and then we're going to have this wonderful life, and then we're going to do this. And so I was always living on this kind of dream of what could be, but not the reality of where I was. My mum was always the strict one and the unpredictable one, and she was fierce, and she'd say the meanest things. She'd make flippant remarks about how I always talked too much, how I was getting fat. I remember she once said to me that how can you ever expect anyone to love you when you're so fat? And at the time, when I looked back, when I went through my healing journey, I actually looked at the stats of how much I weighed in my late teens, and I could have been classed as starving, according to the World Health Organization, because she didn't really feed me. And so what I learned to hate was my body through puberty. And so I realised that for years I'd been trying to lose my body shape, not weight. I've been always trying to lose weight, but it was actually my body shape that I was trying to lose. In later years, she would get very, very violent, especially when my dad wasn't there. And she'd come right up into my face. And she would shout. And I knew I had to stay stoic, because if I gave her anything, if I raised an eyebrow, that was not a good time. It would all turn violent and angry and messy. Now, the one thing I always believed when I was younger is that I had a good parent and I had a bad parent. I had this evil dragon mother who I loved and admired, by the way, but that's a whole complicated thing. Like, I always wanted to be her, I wanted to be like her, thought she was the most fabulous person in the world, and I was just a piece of a word I can't say in the House of Commons. So I used to have this kind of notion of good parent, bad parent, and that I wasn't good enough. And the thing is what I learned through starting a healing journey is that there's no such thing, really. There's two broken parents. Because to be with an alcoholic and to stay with an alcoholic, that person must be struggling themselves and must have some type of codependency. And actually what my dad didn't realise he did, and bless his soul, I love him to pieces, he didn't realise he was denying my emotions when he was saying, it will be okay. And he did a lot of damage as well, because he didn't let me feel what I was feeling, and he denied everything. So as I grew up, I denied everything. So I always thought I didn't have it that bad. I wasn't beaten, I wasn't sexually abused. But emotional abuse makes us park our emotions whilst being scared of others, and John Bradshaw described it as a soul murder. So what I went through, and what a lot of people here went through, was soul murder. It creates toxic shame, a shame that envelops you, and you think that your sheer existence is wrong. I thought I escaped. I thought I was tough when I got older. I thought I was different, but then I also thought nobody understood me. Hence covered in the tattoos and all of that. I was ashamed of my sheer existence. I felt unlovable and not good enough. I assumed that if I was thinner, if I was whiter, if my nose was smaller, or if I was more successful, then maybe I would be lovable. Somebody would be able to see that I was lovable if I just showed, if I just did enough. here's the big thing, you can't. There was nothing that I could achieve. There was nothing I could do that would make me feel enough. So, I focused on my career. I put loads of energy in. And my grandma died on this journey. She was the person who offered me a lot of love in my life, and so kept me grounded in many ways alongside my dad. I never cried when she died. I never cried when I cared for my mum while she was dying of cancer and when she passed away. And you can't keep going on with these emotions, the emotions from childhood, the emotions from an adult, and keep stuffing them and stuffing them and stuffing them. So, on the brink of a breakdown, I went to a therapist, and the therapist didn't understand what children of alcoholics go through. So she made me just sit there and talk and just listened. And so I just went more and more in myself and became more and more shamed, thinking she was judging me, and that's when I had a nervous breakdown. I couldn't work. I just sobbed all day. And I couldn't eat, I couldn't do anything. My brain told me that I was pathetic because I didn't have the guts to kill myself. I used to plan it every day and tell myself how pathetic I was. And then I was blessed enough to find a group with other children of alcoholics. And I learnt that I had a fear of authority figures. I learnt that I always had a why me mindset. I had a mindset stuck like that. I learned I felt responsible for everybody's pain and didn't expect anything back. I learned that I felt guilty if I ever said no. I learned criticism felt like the end of the world. I had a fear of abandonment. I had hypervigilance. I learned that every child of an alcoholic is different and has different stories, but there are certain similarities, and I'm sure there's things I've said that you might just identify with. It doesn't matter what race, what gender, what orientation, or what your economic wealth is, because I always used to think that if I had rich parents, it would have been okay. I learned in my recovery that when I was in university and my first sexual experience was a rape, and I didn't have the strength to say no or stand up for myself when that guy made fun of me the whole way through university, I learned it's because my mum had never taught me it was okay to say no. My dad had never taught me it was okay to say no. But I have luckily gone through a process of healing, and when I tell you it's hard, oh my God, it's hard. I had to cry, I had to grieve, I had to feel this rage and this anger, and some days I didn't think I'd be able to move or get out of bed. It was all consuming. Everything I saw, I felt jealous, I felt all of these emotions. And what I realised is when my brain was developing, when it was marinated in this trauma, I'd learned all of these ways of surviving in this alcoholic home, and I was taking them into my adult life, and I didn't need them anymore. I didn't need to be terrified that people were going to leave me, because I'm fine on my own. I don't need anybody anyway. I learned all of these things about myself and all of these strengths, and I learned to fall in love with myself. I learned to change that voice in my head. So now as I walk in and I go, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? There's a voice that comes in and goes, no, Sophie, you've earned this. You're a wonderful person and people are going to sit and listen to you. And I got that through the strength that I had from the people that helped me recover, and through the love I was able to give to myself, and through grieving and going through this journey. And I think I can't tell you how the recovery journey goes, because it's different for everybody. Some people cry loads, some people get angry. It's different in the same way that different patterns can come through. But the one thing I can tell you is that there is a hope of recovery. There is 100%, and I still suffer. I forgot to eat lunch because I'm really bad at self-care, so I forgot to eat lunch, so I'm sat here really hungry. But I do amazing other things. I made my bed this morning. Do you know how proud I am of that? It's such a little thing. I wasn't taught to make my bed. And I now don't think that the fact I'm a presenter or any of that makes me amazing, because they're just the skills that I was given by my parents. And some people are given good skills, some people are given bad skills. If you're somebody who sits at home and can't get to work and cannot work because you're so emotionally crippled in your head, we're the same. And you have strength in other areas. And we all just need to be given the opportunity to heal, because essentially we are still children, because we were never allowed to grow up. We were never given the opportunity to become adults. So I was walking around functioning in the world as a child. And so, yes, if you're watching this and you're thinking we must help the children, but the only way to be able to help them as well is to help yourself and to focus on yourself and to learn to love yourself, which is really hard because no one tells you how to do it in a book. It's a process you have to go through yourself. And so that's why I shout about NACOA, because my journey of getting well was through anonymous groups that I wasn't allowed to talk about. So I was like, but I need to talk about this. I need to share this. Now that I'm okay, I want everyone else to be okay. People shouldn't be walking around in that pain that got me in a nervous breakdown. So I share NACOA, I talk about NACOA, I tell you my story because that's what I'm able to share in this world. And the work NACOA does is phenomenal. The fact that a child, what I would have done to have had a NACOA, in fact, that's a lie, I probably wouldn't have called because I was too busy protecting my parents. And that's the thing. Police turn up, I would have protected my parents to the death, to the end of me. No one would have ever known. And so that's why there's a major thank you to everybody who's spoken through their shame and through their pain, because it's only by telling the truth can we really help people change. Thank you.
Sophie, I don't really know what to say. It was as powerful as I knew it would be, having done the live review in the way that we did, right? And I think it's such a nice sort of way to bring everybody that spoke to a kind of close in that way, because you talk so much about recovery and you talk so much about healing, right? And at the end of the day, I think that's what we're trying to give. We're trying to give that we're trying to empower children, right, at the earliest possible chance to be able to give them that help and support. And I do want to quickly touch on what you said at the end, that you wouldn't have called NACOA, right? I wouldn't have called NACOA either. And that's why, and I'm going to highlight it again, the work of NACOA is so vitally important, because what NACOA knows and understands is that, right? And we don't make it a trade-off on how much information are you going to give us. If you don't tell us, we can't help you. We make sure that that space is available, and the help and support for these children is not based upon whether they're able to give information or interact with anybody, because most of them will be missed off if that's the case. Yeah, most of them will be missed off. I also believe that even if I had have engaged with services, I don't know if I ever would have gone beyond protecting my mum and my dad from those services. And so the anonymity that the helpline brings, what we do online, I would have been a lurker. I would have been a NACOA lurker.
Same.
I would have been looking at the social media, gathering information. It's why the publications are so important. It's why training professionals in the way that we do is so important. You talked about therapies, right, and therapists, and how sometimes they don't even know what they're dealing with when it comes to children affected by parents drinking. And so the work that we're already doing is there. And that's why NACOA has existed for as long as it has. And you highlight that in everything that you say. It runs through everything that you say. I'm certainly grateful that you're here. I do believe what you will bring, you will push the narrative on. You will push everybody towards talking, particularly what we can do for ourselves as adult children. So I thank you for that. I'm looking at the screen while I'm talking. I'm just going to move this back to the centre as well. We do have plenty of space now for questions, and so we do want to invite them. I've got a couple here, and I'm going to come to these. First, I'm going to come to you, Hussein. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear, yeah.
It was to put the NACOA funding ask into context. And I don't even think NACOA is asking for the full ticket. So NACOA costs about $200,000 a year to run. And I think that, you know, with the fundraising that they do and all the amazing stuff that happens, they raised about half of that themselves. And I looked online while all this was going on, and I looked at how much the House of Commons subsidises alcohol for. Because I just wanted to look at what do other things cost that they spend money on. How much does stationery cost? How much do they spend on watering plants? And then I thought, well, I wonder if they subsidise alcohol. And they spend £600,000 a year subsidising alcohol. which that's a shameful statistic. Sorry, I can't believe I'm crying on this platform. It just made me really angry. I'm someone who works with NACOA. I kind of do stuff behind the scenes with Hilary and sometimes with Josh, doing the training with Laura. And I guess one of the things to reflect back to government is what we're asking for is not the world. 100k per annum would do it. So, one of the asks might be stop subsidising alcohol in the House of Commons and fund NACOA for the next 6 years at 100k per year. Would be my suggestion. It's not so much a question as really a point to spark discussion, and I do apologise for the emotion that came along with it. It was really unexpected.
Who's saying we wouldn't be a group of COAs together if we weren't getting emotional and then straight away apologising. So I think you're fully at home in this space, mate. Look, I appreciate your passion and I appreciate your reflections. Because it feels such a governmental thing, Liam, I wonder if you have any reflections based on what he said.
Well, yeah, no, I was smiling to myself, Josh, because as you say, it is very few people come along to these things and leave without a kind of strange turbulence of emotions inside that is somehow kind of let out of the bottle. That's why, in a way, I can't wait until we're all back together physically, because at least then we can hug each other, which is a bit quite a comfort. So, the point about the NACOA helpline is exactly right. I mean, if you think about how much is spent on subsidies in the Commons, if you think about the amount of money that comes in alcohol taxes, billions and billions and billions. Think about how much tax is paid on advertising alcohol to children, frankly, or in settings that children are exposed to. And yet all we're asking for is, a rounding error, basically. Funnily enough, I mean, that's why I'm sort of fairly confident we're going to win this argument, because the logic of it is so powerful. And I think, there are just now allies to this cause that we didn't have 6 or 7 years ago. I mean, thanks to the patient work, the profile of this has just grown and grown. I mean, it was an extraordinary moment when Princess Catherine, I think together with Forward Trust and others, ensured that NACOA was included as part of a group of charities in a week focused on addiction issues. And just watching her speak with a banner behind her that had 6 or 7 logos, including the NACOA logo, I mean, it was just a mind-blowing moment. But it reflects an understanding about the scale of the mental health challenge in our country and the challenge of mental health for young people. And if 1 in 5 kids live in households where parents drink too much, well, guess what? Parental alcohol misuse is a significant driver of the state of mental health for our kids. That's a massive emotional and economic cost. And what we're asking for to deal with it is tiny. So, you've got to be an optimist if you're in politics. And I am optimistic we can kind of win that argument.
Good.
Point very well made.
Thank you. Yes, and thank you, Hussein. I can see there's a hand up. I'm going to come to. Is Woody still here? Somebody whose name on Zoom is Woody. Yeah. There you go, waving at us. Do you want to unmute yourself, Woody? There you go. That's it.
I'm going to take a very materialistic, follow the money approach. I think the expertise here in NACOA covers the needs of children very well. But outside NACOA, I can understand that many people don't see this as a priority area. I get so angry when I see what's going on in Downing Street and worrying about the environment that Wolf Johnson is growing up in. I did a typical mad professor thing. I wrote a letter to The Guardian about it, which of course they didn't publish. But in terms of the money, and this is where people like Liam can make a big difference, I'm delighted that the Health Secretary is showing some interest. That would be wonderful. But having been a commissioner of health services in the past, I know that financial decisions often come and go very abruptly. So in April you think it's all set, then in October the money disappears. So have we got another government department that I think would be an obvious one? And if we're talking about the sort of school-age children who phone the helpline, the obvious department is the Department of Education. And I've just been checking their website, and they still have up the National Initiative for Relationships Education. I've put the details on the chat. Now, this is a requirement of every school in the land, from primary age to secondary age. And if there's one group of children who are going to school and need support with relationships, it's the children of alcoholics. So I think that's obvious. So we have a formal responsibility, you have budgets to promote these key areas in every school in the land. How are we going to get the Department for Education to reach into their pockets?
Thank you,
That's
Woody.
good. Yeah, sorry, good.
Go on, Calum.
No, I was just saying that's good. I sometimes don't realise that there's different areas and avenues to reach to, and I think that's a great idea if you put it into a school and say that in order for that person to be helped with relationships, because it's a massive thing for every child of an alcoholic. So
Yeah.
I think that's a great avenue for us to try to go down.
Yeah? Liam, why aren't you doing this?
Well, the pilots that were funded by Jeremy Hunt, I can't remember how many there were, I think there were 6, and it was about £6 million. But a number of those pilots included educators, both schools but also nurseries as well. So, you know, when we look back at 2022, it could be that this is a real inflection moment. It could be that this is a really pivotal year because two things are kind of coming together. So one, we get the results from the pilots, get documented best practice, we know what good looks like, but then second, we get budget access that allows us to universalise that good practice. But, you know, a lot of the decisions end up being quite local decisions, so you have to drive them through at the ground level, which is why you cannot make progress without building a movement, and a movement needs stories. And I just think we could be making good progress on the policy side, and, you know, as I said, I'll believe it when I have it in black and white. But we mustn't think that that is a substitute for building a movement, because it's making sure that if you're, you know, a mental health first aider, you're a young primary school teacher in, say, you know, a school in Shard End in my constituency, you're maybe 23, 24, you know, you're really keen, you're keen to do a good job, you've got this new role in the school as a mental health first aider. How do we make sure that that individual knows what a COA is, knows what to look out for, knows what to do about it? You know, that's the kind of reach that ultimately we've got to be able to have ultimately. And so policy is good and money is essential, but in the long run it's going to be the movement that really changes the lives, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's what's so special about what we're doing here, because even what Woody has just said right there, you know, it was probably been thought of before around the conversation that's been had over the years, but it can sometimes just take a moment like today where, Liam, you're giving us the news that we'll have the information back soon so we know how things work. Woody says there's actually a new sector you can tap into their budget. It's like moments like this is what create this movement. So I think this year's going to be an epic year for us at the COA and for finding funds from whatever avenue we need to make sure it works.
Yeah. Anything to add, anyone else, before I move on? No? Julian, I can see that you've got your hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, hi, thank you. Woody actually asked almost kind of the same thing that I wanted to ask Liam as well. So it's great to hear about the £177 million, you know, potentially happening or, you know, being pledged by Sajid Javid. But what I'm wondering still is, and I think I had the same question pretty much last year, is some sort of long-term strategy here. Like we just mentioned about schools or the Department of Education. So I always find it easy for the government to say in front of the camera or newspapers, oh, we'll give you 177 million quid. And that's amazing because NACOA only needs 200 grand a year. But what's the actual long-term thing in terms of when you think about, when we talk about 2.6 million children are affected by this or are COAs in this country, that's pretty much £68 per child. And that doesn't even include, children of parents who've got different addictions than alcohol, other drug addictions. So my question is pretty much that as well, in terms of a long-term strategy, rather than just pledging money to charities like NACOA, what would the government be willing to do? And secondly, me as a citizen, how can I actually have an impact, or how can I improve things? By, for example, would it be worth writing to my MP, who is Karen McCarthy, or what can I do to improve, to have a longer-term strategy, like we talked about in schools, for example. I remember when I left schools after my A levels, I knew all the capitals of every Asian country, but I didn't know that my dad was an alcoholic. So these sort of things that I find quite important in where we're going to be in 20 years' time.
Well said.
Good question.
Yeah. Liam, do you want me to come to you first? It feels...
Yeah, just very quickly, there's not a good answer to this because trying to mainline money for the long term in government is just well nigh impossible. Which is, so the funding that is coming online, that is for all addiction treatment as well, remember. We have potentially got access to it, but it is for all addiction treatment, and it's a 3-year funding pot. It's 500 million plus over 3 years. But again, that's why ultimately there's got to be a culture change, and that's why many of the other things in the Children of Alcoholics Manifesto are important, like minimum unit alcohol pricing, like the ban on advertising that we talk about. There's a whole bunch of other measures that are going to be needed too. So we've got to, I think, aim at a cultural shift, and you can only deliver a cultural shift through a movement. And I think we've just got to be skilled enough to know and sort of savvy enough to know that you do tend to win funding for public services in phases, and just because you've won it once doesn't mean you're going to win it again, which is why you have got to build good political understanding across the spectrum. So I think we should think about what the bottom-up campaign is to constituency MPs, because that does have power and potential. And I think once we've got some of the details from the pilots and we've clarified what this money issue looks like, then I think we'll be able to frame asks for that letter writing campaign.
Yeah. I just want to add on what Liam said as well. It kind of comes back for me to a little bit of what Sophie was saying in what she said. There is a want and a need, I think, in all of us to want to go and scoop up and save every single one of the children that are affected by this, right? To go and give them this incredible program that's going to completely change their life, right? I weren't engaging in that program when I was a kid, whether it existed or not. So the cultural change that Liam talks about for me is really, really important, because I didn't want you to scoop me up and save me, right? I just wanted to at least know that what I was experiencing, the ways that it made me feel, made sense, right? And I didn't want to be taken away. I didn't want a program, right? I didn't want any of it. What I wanted, or what I needed, actually, if I break it down into a very clear thing, and I don't just say this as an ambassador, what I needed was NACOA. I needed my teacher to know a little bit about my experiences. I didn't want to be treated any better. I didn't want to be treated any different. I wanted somebody to understand my experiences a little bit better so they could help me comprehend my experiences a little bit better. And that is a cultural shift, right? That is about us all beginning to kind of understand this on a deeper level. And I think NACOA we're already doing that. And with a funding injection, we can, all the packs, we've got over 20 packs, and it's still growing, that can go out to all different professionals, written especially for them. We've got training, it's there, it's ready to go, to be delivered. So it's there. The blueprint is there, and although it doesn't go in and save every single one of these, I don't believe every single one of these children wants saving. I think they want support, adequate support that NACOA can offer.
I think the good news as well is that I think that luckily, in some ways, the youth are a little bit different than we might have been when we were kids. I think there's a bit more understanding and openness to it. So I think the culture shift is happening in ways, and also, Julian, you said that you wanted to, what could you do to help maybe reach out to your MP? Maybe when you do reach out to your local one, let them know what NACOA is, or even better, I think, as Josh said, it starts with NACOA. The movement with NACOA, I think, will get to where we need to get to. So, figure out a way that if you wanted to, you can work with NACOA as a platform instead of reaching out to your MP and asking what difference you can make in the government as such.
Here.
Just an idea.
Yeah, no, I love it. Anything else, anyone? Annette, I have seen you, so don't worry, I'm coming there in a second. And does anyone want to add anything to that before we... No? Okay, thank you, Julian. Annette, why don't you unmute yourself and we'll ask your question.
Hi, I've been a NACOA supporter, I guess, for 5 years now.
Thank you.
Brilliant talks by all of you. I've been affected, but actually my dad had mental health problems, but I had exactly the same experiences as all of you. I also blog on sobriety forums, including Club Soda and another one called Boots Musings, so I do promote NACOA there.
Brilliant.
We are not being ambitious enough. In my home 11 years ago, there was terrible violence caused by alcohol. And I could cry about it, but it's a long time ago and things are a lot better, thank God. But alcoholism and violence and the destruction of children and their childhoods and violence out on the streets is overwhelming. And this is not just in the UK, it's international. Now, I suggest, and stand to be challenged, all alcohol companies must donate 10% of their profits to support the families affected by alcoholism. And that's the parents, that's the addicts, and that's their kids, that's all the people who have to deal with them. We have the biggest this year after 2 years of the pandemic. The police will listen and support, they're under-resourced. The judges will listen and support, they're under-resourced. Teachers will listen and support. The majority of society wants to see change. And also, in this country, we have the greatest choice of alcohol-free drinks pretty much in the world. So there's no excuse anymore. People shouldn't hide. People should be given options. I also support Phoenix Futures, who do great work. They've been going for 50 years. So I see the full gamut. Please be ambitious, because we need to tackle this as a whole, as a cohesive whole. There's so many organisations out there. When we go in as NACOA, yes, we will be heard, because NACOA does brilliant work and it has a great reputation. But to go in as a body, if there's 50 people sitting in front of a select committee, how powerful would that be? Please consider a joint approach.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your passion. Anybody want to add anything to what Annette said?
10%.
I'll join as one of the 50. Let's go.
I do, thank you, Annette. There is one kind of avenue that I always look at, and I do think there's a case for trying to keep people on side as much as we can. I do worry if we start attacking alcohol too much, then everyone turns off. And there's not enough sober people out there yet, I don't think, for the mission. We need some of the people that still drink as well. But I think we should, I love what you say about being ambitious. I love that. I am a little bit conscious of time.
Okay.
Thank you, though. Thank you for your passion, Annette. Thank you. I do want to just give Meg an opportunity. Meg, if you'd like to unmute yourself. We've got a couple of minutes. This is probably going to be the last question that we'll do, because we've got a small video that we want to play before the end. So I just want to give Meg, because she's been waiting very patiently.
There she is.
There you go.
Yeah, no, it's just a small kind of niche point that the COA label is really, really helpful for people to personally identify with. Also great analytically to kind of measure the challenges that COAs face. But I'd always worry a little bit that it can sometimes exclude those in like untraditional family setups who've maybe been affected by a step-parent's drinking or a grandparent that's raised them or as a care leaver or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering how NACOA can try and make sure that they can retain the power of that label, but reconcile it with those that are maybe sometimes excluded from support that they need.
Yeah, no, really well articulated, Meg. Did you want to go? She's still there. She can still hear you.
You're there. I just think that's a really important question, because I think as much as these labels empower, I think they can also exclude at the same time. So I think it's about just about being sensitive to the fact that, you know, some labels might not fit everyone. I don't really know what the semantic answer is with this. It's like, are you because otherwise because what you want is something that's catchy. That's how things catch on. That's how people identify, is when things are easy to, they're easy to say. So I don't really know what the answer is, but I can definitely relate to not feeling, for whatever reason, not feeling. I mean, for a long time I felt like I was a child of divorce. And I was like, am I a COD? Can I be a child of an alcoholic and be an alcoholic in sobriety myself? And so I can really identify with this kind of like, this kind of wealth, but at the same time sort of poverty of what label you choose. And sometimes I feel like I've been in Al-Anon meetings and I feel like I'm betraying the people that I sit with in AA meetings. So I don't know if anyone can kind of like join in with how difficult it is to.
Go on.
Yeah, it's. I think you just have to hope that if it's in the lifestyle, or if they know something of alcohol, that everyone can understand it's on the same page. It's. I think COA hasn't been around for ages. It's only been actually created a few years back by, I think, NACOA, like just to give it a name and a title. So I think hopefully the sensitivity of it, people, if you're in it and you understand, will know. But it's a really good point. I've never actually even thought about that before, because I'm so focused on children of alcoholics that you kind of forget about the rest. And sometimes I catch myself so focused on the children of alcoholics that I'm not talking about the alcoholics themselves, which is also a whole spectrum that we all care about as well. So it's like this fine line. You just hope. It's weird as this sounds. It's like this club you're in, and you hope everybody gets all of it.
Yeah. Jane, was you waiting to speak or just
No,
agreeing?
I was just nodding and agreeing.
The one thing that I would say, Meg, and I think you articulated the question really well, because you highlighted the power in the term, right? And I think we've done a lot of work around this as NACOA over the last few years, and particularly around the word alcoholic. And what we recognise is that the term child of an alcoholic is one that hits straight in the heart of people that have been affected by this. And so we never really wanted to get rid of that as a term. What we have done on a broader scale as a charity is kind of increase our language. So we will often talk more publicly about being affected by a parent's drinking or loving somebody affected by alcohol. And so I think on like a large public scale, we do try and broaden our language to try and make sure that it is inclusive as possible, while still recognising the power in the term itself. Because I know for me, if I had seen a poster at school that said, "Are you the child of an alcoholic?" it would have landed straight away. If I saw a poster that said, "Do you think you've been possibly affected by somebody in your family that's affected by alcohol misuse disorder," right? I might have walked straight past the poster. So I think we have to make sure that we are focused mainly on the people that we are serving, but that we are as inclusive as we can be, and that's about the language that we use on a public scale.
I feel like I can go on and on about this. I just want to say one more thing on it as well. It's just this really strange thought of what do you do to make sure everybody isn't offended by this conversation, when really you just want to say, no, I don't want to have to say alcohol dependent and use the PC term because I've lived this trauma. I want to use whatever words I want to use to get my point across, So it's just this case of, wanting to use the right words to keep everybody on side, but also being like, I can say what I want and do what I want because I've been somebody who's dealt with this firsthand.
Yeah.
So, it's really good to have everybody's opinion, and now that you brought that up, I think it will make other people think about how we don't dissociate ourselves from others that are going through the same thing, maybe just not it being apparent.
Yeah, and I think you know, in the training that we deliver, in the publications that we send out, we have broadened our language very purposely as a result of that. On the helpline, when people call, the caller will always lead what terminology we use anyway. But on a kind of public information level, I think what Calum's highlighted is really, really important. This is, there is a piece, the child of the alcoholic in me is saying, this is our thing, let us have our thing. Nobody's ever given us anything anywhere in our life, let us have it. I hear that calling, but, we recognise the need to kind of be inclusive in the way in which we approach on a more public level in terms of the way that we deliver training, the publications, and you'll see in the publications that it does reflect that. Look, did you want to say?
Thank you to Meg, because I think it's good that we are
Yeah.
always questioning our language and the way we approach things, and I think it's important to thank you for raising that.
And again, the way that you articulated it, I thought was incredibly balanced and asked in such a way.
Better than we do.
Better than perhaps me and passionate Calum do from our seats. Michael did have a question. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask us very, very quickly, and we can give one sentence answers, Michael? One sentence answers, Michael.
Yeah, Josh, it was really to say thank you to everybody, and I just want to pick up that point that Liam made about the collaboration. That campaign that was launched in October, Taking Action on Addiction, when we all came together at BAFTA, and we had an extraordinary day, not only for all of us together, but the coverage and the red tops and everyone was quite extraordinary. And I've been in the addiction field. I just want to say, I think we work together more powerfully than we do separately.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Michael. Right, look, I want to thank everybody that's been here today. I don't want to go over time. I'm conscious of that. It's, for me, it's been full of passion, like it always is when it's COAs. Thank you to all the speakers. I thought Sophie closed it out incredibly. We want to finish with the film Poker Face, that you may or may not have seen. We're going to share that now, and it's just a final thank you from everybody here. And it goes on.
Okay, wait. Okay, I'm coming now. Dad.
Thank you, Hussein. Thank you. Look, it's a massive thank you from all of us here to close down. Thank you, Liam, for showing up in spite of how you're feeling and what you're going through. We have raised a little bit of money today. They're going to use the money that they would have put in the heater meter. They're going to give that to Nicola. We're going to go and put our coats on. So massive thank you, honestly, to all the speakers, from Liam to Jonathan, to everybody else that showed up today. I don't know what else to say, really, other than I'm going to leave it there. Calum's going to close us out.
I just want to add one more thing. I know we all support each other and celebrate each other as COAs, but great work from Josh as well. He's been leading from the front with this and hosts this platform, which isn't an easy thing to do. So well done, Josh. And just thanks everybody for showing up. Keep spreading the word. Let's keep growing this thing. Instead of 80 this time, let's have 180 next time. Just keep doing what we can, and the difference will be made.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.